All right. Welcome. My name is Meredith Newmark, and I'm the Senior Program Manager here at Atlas Core. Thank you for joining us on the informational webinar today. My guest is Renata, who is one of our fellows, and she'll be speaking about her experience a little bit later. The purpose of this webinar is just to kind of give an introduction to Atlas Core for those of you who either just heard about it very recently or you want to learn more before you start working on the application, or if you're in the middle of the application and just wanted to get some tips. So basically the format of our webinar today is we're going to introduce Atlas Core, what we're about, what we do, and tell you a little bit about the program and the process itself. And then Renata is going to tell us a little bit about her personal experience with the fellowship. Why did she apply? What is she doing here? What does she plan to do after the fellowship? And then we're going to go through the top 12 frequently asked questions from applicants. And I'll be answering them for you so that you can sort of hear what the common questions we hear from applicants all the time are and hear what the answers are. And then at the end, we'll take questions for a little bit of time. And so the way to ask questions will be to, as you're watching the YouTube video, to type questions in the comment section. So just comment on the video, and I'll periodically, I'll stop at the end to answer any questions, and then I'll answer questions at the end. So, so if you type in your question now, just be patient. I'll be answering everything at the end. Yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. So just to give you a brief overview of Atlas Core. Atlas Core is an international network of nonprofit leaders and organizations. Our mission is to address critical social issues by developing leaders, strengthening organizations, and promoting innovation through an overseas fellowship of skilled nonprofit professionals. We engage leaders who are committed to the nonprofit sector in 6 to 18-month professional fellowships at organizations where they can learn best practices, build organizational capacity, and return home to create a global network of change makers. And the way it works is fellows are serving full-time at host organizations located in the United States and working on issues that complement their expertise. Fellows develop their leadership skills while they're sharing best practices and supplement that knowledge they're gaining from their host organization with theoretical topics that we present in our training series called the Atlas Core Global Leadership Lab. Some of the benefits of the fellowship, in addition to the training you'd receive, is we provide a basic living stipend. That stipend covers food, shared housing, and local transportation. It's a very limited stipend. It mainly just covers your basic needs. We also cover the international flights to get you here to the U.S. and the cost of getting your visa. So those are some of the benefits we provide. And most fellowships are 12 months. There is the option to extend if both you and the host organization agree on it, up to 6 additional months. So your fellowship could be as long as 18 months if you're accepted to the fellowship. We do offer some shorter fellowships, including in January we'll be, for the 3rd time, we'll be having our Think Tank Links Fellowship. This is a fellowship that's 6 months, and it's just for political and economic researchers from around the world, and they're serving for 6 months in U.S.-based think tanks or political research organizations specifically focused in that area. We will also be offering our 2nd year of the Asan Nanum Atlas Core Frontier Fellowship, which is a 12-month fellowship specifically for South Korean professionals, and it's in partnership with the Asan Nanum Foundation in South Korea. So we're excited to be offering that again, and hope to see some great applications from South Korea again. And we are also excited to be continuing our fellowship for Sudanese and South Sudanese fellows, and this is in partnership with the U.S. Special Envoy to Sudan and South Sudan, where in this case, fellows would serve for 9 months in the U.S. and then 3 months back in Africa, doing an independent community project. So those are some special initiatives that we have where the fellowship structure may be slightly different from our regular or classic fellowship, but everyone goes through the same application process. So don't worry too much about those details, and if you didn't fit any of those profiles I just described for those special initiatives, don't worry. We accept applications from all around the world and with all kinds of backgrounds. And so I just wanted to mention some of the special initiatives that we're recruiting for right now, where those fellows are also part of our fellowship, even if it may have a slightly different name. So that's an overview of the Atlas Corps Fellowship and some of the special initiatives we're offering. Next, I would like to have Renata describe a little bit about her experience and why she's doing the fellowship and what she hopes to gain from it.
Hi everyone, so I'm an Atlas Corps Fellow from Class 15. As Meredith mentioned, my name is Renata. I'm from Mexico City, and I'm serving at the American Red Cross at the Global Disaster Preparedness Center. So we're doing disaster preparedness. So why did I decide to apply to Atlas Corps? It's because I'm decided that I wanted to pursue a career in nonprofit sector. And in Mexico, my previous experience was in a local way. It was in a local NGO that worked with indigenous communities. And I decided I wanted to get more knowledge and learn how our bigger organizations or more global organizations doing the work all around the world. So as well, I guess I'm in an age that, you already have the experience, you want to know what's out there, get to know new people, and it was good timing in my life, and I had this big desire to learn from the nonprofit sector in the U.S. and internationally. So when Atlas Corps offered everything, stipend, a very great host organizations, and a great network of fellows that make all this possible.
Awesome. And Renata's a fairly new fellow. I think you've been here for about a month and a half or 2 months, yeah. And so I know it's early in your fellowship, but what do you feel like you're learning so far?
Well, so it's been a great experience because I already had this experience of how do you work with probably the communities or how things work in a local NGO, but now I'm having this experience of how are things working in the global level, and as I mentioned, I work in the American Red Cross and the International Service Department. So you get to see all the programs around the world. You get, let's say, like you see the nonprofit sector from a different angle. So before I was working with the population, and now I'm seeing overall where all the programs doing in the world. So I think, and I consider that I'm in the best place to learn of what are all the possibilities available in my social issue. And it's a great place to learn because besides that you learn from the topic, that you learn from the daily work that you're going to have, but you also learn from your colleagues at work, and as Washington itself, and we will touch that topic later, but there's lots of topics that you get offered. It's the knowledge that you learn from your fellowship. It's not just what you do in your computer or in your desk. It's also all the opportunities that you get offered through all the events that they invite you, and and you can attend. And I've been learning a great deal when it comes in how international programs operate in an international way, and all the things that are involved around it.
Awesome. And do you have any ideas of how you'd like to be using that knowledge back home in Mexico, or what kind of field do you expect to be working on after the fellowship?
Yes, definitely. So one of the things I realized, and you start to realize many things that you have in your country that are precious in your social sector, and vice versa, and that have here and that are precious. So the point is, for example, I realize more and more that in Mexico we lack this networking culture. people here know what other organizations are doing, and they're eager to collaborate with what they're doing. Rather, we're in Mexico, even though we have local amazing work with the people, with the beneficiary population, but we're still lacking this networking culture of knowing all the nonprofit sector, all the people who can help support you, and eventually it gets easier, right? It's like a snowball. When you start knowing what people are doing, you get more funding, and you get more ideas, and everything can, like, your program can expand. So that's what, like, I've been thinking a lot about, that I need to bring this back, all this networking, and how to do it, yeah.
Okay, awesome. Well, I'm excited to hear how much you're learning and how much you're gaining from the fellowship. And so the next topic we'd like to go over are our frequently asked questions. And so Renata, who has been through this process before, she's going to ask me some of the questions we hear most from applicants like you, and I'm going to answer them as best as I can, and Renata is welcome to chip in her experience as well. And then hopefully that will kind of clear up any of the remaining questions you have in your mind, and then after that we'll take questions. So so why don't we get started with our first frequently asked question.
Sure. So Meredith, I'm just found out about this great opportunity about Atlas Core program. So how can I apply?
Sure. So it's first you need to make sure you meet all our eligibility requirements, which are listed on our website. Those eligibility requirements are that you have a bachelor's degree or a 4-year college degree equivalent, that you're proficient in English, both written and reading and spoken, that you have about 2 to 10 years of professional experience, that you are aged 35 or under. So it's usually age 22 or 23 to 35 are our fellows, and that you're committed to returning home at the end of the fellowship. Those are our eligibility requirements. And once you have shown you meet those eligibility requirements, then it is a 3-step process. First of all, it's an online application, and the application it covers some of the standard stuff you expect in an application: your education, background, your employment history, and then it also asks you to list your top 4 professional skills and your top 4 professional interest areas. So you describe a little bit your experience with, say, disaster preparedness, and your skill in project management, and that is what we use to help match with host organizations. And then there's 6 300-word essays. So you fill out this online application, and then if you have a good application, you may get passed on to our English test. And it's a timed written English test, 1 hour, 2 essay questions. And then if you pass both of those stages, you may be invited to an interview with our selection board members. And this is a 20 to 30 minute Skype call with either an Atlas Core staff member or a volunteer, where we would go through some questions with you over Skype. If you pass all those stages and you have a strong application, English test, and a strong interview, you'd be what we determine to be a semi-finalist. And that means that we consider you a strong candidate and eligible to be matched with host organizations. And then the final stage of the process is you would be interviewing with potential host organizations. And not every semi-finalist gets to that stage where they're interviewing with a host organization. Those people who make it to that stage are in the finalist stage. And then the host organization decides who they want to interview and who they want to select of the people that they interview. So, and if they select that person, then they become a fellow. So it's all these stages to make it to the final stage where you could potentially become a fellow.
So Meredith, I have a question about this. So how do I've been doing lots of volunteering and lots of internships. Does that count for Does that count as part of my experience, or just professional work? Sure.
So, so if you have, we're looking for at least 2 years of experience, and we can have kind of a broad definition of what that means. So that can include government work, it can include teaching, it can include social enterprise, consulting, it can even include significant volunteer experience like you mentioned, or a full-time internship. So it could be it has to be a pretty significant volunteer experience. It can't just be like a few hours a week. I wouldn't necessarily count that as like a year of experience, but if you are full-time volunteering, that definitely counts. And so we have had fellows as young as 22 and 23 before, but they've had significant leadership experience where they've shown that they're ready for an opportunity like this. And I also wanted to mention that for-profit or business experience can be relevant if it can be applied to the social sector. So sometimes we have fellows who have been in the pharmaceutical industry, and then they're using that to work on combating malaria, for example. So there's some things that you might not think of as nonprofit sector, but that skills that can be translated to the nonprofit sector. So it's kind of a broad definition of when we say 2 to 10 years of experience in the social sector or nonprofit sector, but it has to be something that can translate to the nonprofit sector here in the U.S. and have you be ready for, a fast-paced American office environment.
Okay, so and how long does this application process take?
Sure. So filling out the application itself can take anywhere from a few hours to a few days of a few hours each. Some fellows work on it for like a few hours every week. And the overall selection process can take up to 4 to 5 months for a single class. One thing I think I should have mentioned in my overview is that we have fellows. We have fellowships that begin 3 times a year: January, May, and September. And so we're doing this application process kind of 3 times a year, and accept applications all year long. So if you apply now, we're accepting applications for a fellowship that begins in January 2015. So it can really take even up to 5 or 6 months to place fellows for a particular class, to review the applications, to match people with host organizations, all of that. It can be a long process. And strong candidates who have made it to the semifinalist stage can be considered after the class that they apply for. So someone who applies now and who isn't accepted to our January class, but they're a really strong candidate, we can still consider them for our next class, our May 2015 class. So strong candidates may be considered for several cycles, and several application cycles, and placement can take a while because it can take a while to find that perfect fit. And so but you should know that a semifinalist is not the same as a fellow. We have a lot of semifinalists who never get an interview with a host organization and are never placed. So it's not necessarily that it's a sure thing that you could get placed even after waiting for several cycles. Some people apply and have been in our semifinalist pool for 3 or 4 or 5 cycles now, and they haven't been placed yet. So it's not a guarantee, but we do have people who apply 1 year and are accepted a year or a year and a half down the line. But it is a very competitive process, and don't turn down any other opportunities until you've received an official offer. So that's what I'd say about the length of the process.
Okay, yeah, very useful. So as a personal comment, it took me personally about 2 weeks. It doesn't mean that I was 2 week long every day, but I would start. It was a process for me of 2 weeks. And one thing you have to consider is when you ask for, so you're going to be required to submit some, ask people to send a letter of recommendation. So because consider that the people that are writing this letter for you have their work and their time, so also plan in advance that you will need these letters for your process, for your application. So take that into consideration.
Basically, recommendation letters are due 2 weeks after you submit the application, essentially. It's good to know about how long it took you. I mean, some people do the entire thing the night before it's the priority deadline, and I mean, it would be very difficult to do that. But So that should give you a general timeline of how long it takes.
Yeah, so talking about all this application process, and as I mentioned, it took me 2 weeks plus other 2 weeks of waiting that the people that I requested for
the recommendation
letter, the recommendation letter. It took me 2 weeks plus 2 weeks, so it took me 4 weeks.
Okay, yeah.
So just that you have in mind, it's not a good idea to start it the night before.
Right.
So tell me more about how can I make sure I have a good application.
So the first thing, like I mentioned before, is to just make sure that you meet all the eligibility requirements. Basically, if people don't meet the eligibility requirements, their applications are pretty much automatically go into a not qualified folder. So make sure that you really look on our website and make sure you meet those eligibility requirements. Also, make sure that the English in your application is really good. Make sure it's clear and concise. Read over it, proofread it. Have a friend who also speaks English read over it. Because anyone who's being considered for a fellowship is going to have to be someone who can work efficiently and effectively and communicate in an American office environment where everyone speaks English and everyone writes in English, and we need to have people who are going to have good spoken English and good written English. So so do make sure that you have proofread your application. And then also really try and add some details and specifics into your application. So if you say volunteer management is a skill, how many volunteers did you manage? If you say that you are good at grant writing, how much money have you raised through grants? Or like what kinds of grants have you written or worked on? And you know, try and add those specifics, and don't just fill out the bare minimum. Really try to give detailed examples of why, you know, what makes you such a great candidate. The first essay question is basically writing a one-paragraph biography of yourself. This is often the first thing that host organizations see from your application. We'll send them, you know, here's a few candidates for you to look at, and here's their bios. And so this is a chance for you to really summarize your career and really show someone, this is why I'd be a great fit for this fellowship. So really try and make sure that that first essay question, especially your one-paragraph biography, is really well written and really captures your career so far. Another essay question that people sometimes get tripped up on is, I think it's the 5th essay question, and it asks for your successes and failure, or asks for one example of a success and a failure in your career. This may be a little bit of an unusual question in different cultures. I think it's a very American style question, because we do actually expect you to list both a success and a failure. It's actually okay to talk about a professional failure you've had, as long as you talk about what you learned from it and how you overcame it. That's actually a good thing in the applications we're reading. If we can see that someone has overcome a past failure and that they learned something from it. If you say, oh, I've never had a failure in your career, it maybe shows that you haven't had enough experience in your career, or you know, you need to show humility in your experience. So you can actually make your application stronger by describing a failure, which I know sounds a little bit counterintuitive sometimes, but it's true, just trust me. And then the last piece of advice I'd give is to really sell yourself. So everything in your application should really go towards, how can I show that I'm a great candidate for this fellowship and for all the potential organizations that may be looking at my application. Think about, like, if you had 30 seconds to convince a host organization like the Red Cross to accept you for this fellowship, what would you want them to know about you? And really get to that core of your strengths and your experience, and, you know, really be driving home that point of why you're great for this fellowship.
Great. There's just one comment I would like to add. Personally, for me, it was very interesting going through all this process, all this application process. Since it's a very extensive application. I mean, it's good enough. So, and you're asked, it's not, you know, we all have a CV. So you know what you've been doing and what are your working experience, but as you have to really it's a space for for reflection and for self-knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
And you really have to think, what have been my challenges, what have been my opportunities, what are my strongest skills, what are my areas of knowledge. So it's really a good opportunity, like see it as a good opportunity to get to know yourself better.
Mm-hmm.
And actually before I was selected and everything, at the end I said to myself, like, even if I get chosen or not, it's been, the whole application process has been good for me to get to know myself and me professionally, because this exercise of placing it and typing it down, it's a good exercise.
Yeah, absolutely. Like there's a question that asks you about your goals or what do you want to do after the fellowship, and I can definitely force you to think about that. To really think about what you want to get out of this. Great.
So okay, so I'm in this process. So how do I get to choose my host organization, or I know someone, or can I suggest my host organization if they are not already in the list of people you're partnered with?
So the way it works is Atlas Core matches applicants to potential host organizations. So we have a partnerships team that works on, taking what they hear from potential host organizations. A host organization could say, "Oh, we're looking for someone who has experience in disaster preparedness, and they're from Latin America." And our partnerships team goes, "Okay, let's look in our pool and see who fits that description. Oh, look, take a look at Renata. She seems to fit this profile, and she might be a good fit for your organization." And then, the Red Cross interviews her and decides to accept her. So that we kind of work on that matching process, and it's really all based on what host organizations are looking for and what's in your application. So make sure you describe yourself well in your application, so that we have a good sense of your profile. Those skills and the interest areas that you list, those are actually really important for matching semifinalists to host organizations. And if you do make it to the interview stage with a host organization, make sure you're asking a lot of questions to determine whether it's the right fit for you too. So it has to be a good fit on both sides for the fellowship to work out and be successful. So even though fellows generally don't get to choose their organization, you do have the opportunity to ask questions and make sure that it'll be a good fit. Sometimes fellows also, or applicants, suggest host organizations that, if there's someone who's not already on our list of potential partners, sometimes applicants do suggest host organizations, but just know that there's no guarantee that you could be placed there. It depends on a lot of factors of making a placement work. So there's a lot of reason. We could even be already talking to that organization, and so just know that there's no guarantee. Feel free to send in suggestions of where you'd like to be placed, and particularly if you have a contact at a U.S.-based organization, we'd be happy to send them some information on how they could be a host organization. But in general, if there's no contact that you have that we could send information to, it's not super helpful. So that's kind of how the matching process works. It's generally Atlas Core driving it.
Okay, great. So suppose I'm already accepted, and I want to know what will be my role in my host organization.
So it's a wide range of roles, and it really depends on the organization and the fellow. It really varies a lot. We have fellows who are working on managing projects, fellows who are working on fundraising and grant writing, some who are working on report writing and grant management. We have fellows who are doing training, research. It just really runs the gamut. There's a lot of different roles that our fellows have at organizations. And one commonality between them is I think that none of our fellows are treated as interns. They're all treated as a member of the team, where they are really contributing and really doing substantive projects as well as learning. So, and I think fellows also have a chance to somewhat define what they do there. I mean, it has to be agreed upon by both the host organization and the fellow, but fellows do have a potential to take initiative, suggest projects that they want to work on, or take, really kind of shape the fellowship themselves. We always say that the fellowship is whatever you whatever you make of it. Yeah, what you put into it is what you get out of it. So there is some room to shape the fellowship, but so the role itself looks different at every organization.
That's very true.
Yeah.
It depends. It's the role is it's different as the organization and itself and as a fellow. It's also very much what you bring into it. What is the project like? And there's not a fellow that has the same role as another fellow, but you're definitely treated as a professional within the organization.
Great.
So okay, so now I'm in my fellowship, and what is a fellow, or how does a fellow experience? What is a fellow experience like outside of the host organization? You just mentioned that the fellowship is what you make out of it, but what are the opportunities that I will be offered? How can I make it happen?
Sure. So I'll describe a little bit in general, and I'd be happy to hear your personal experience as well. So outside of the host organization, the fellow community is really strong. I know fellows hang out a lot, and they see each other both professionally. They may see each other at some of the same professional events, or they may see each other personally. And I know fellows are always hanging out socially as well, like whether it's having a picnic together or watching the World Cup games together, things like that. So the fellow community is really strong. And the cross-cultural exchange is a big part of it too. So fellows, you know, you may be hanging out or even living with fellows from another continent. You know, we have, you know, in 8 years we've had fellows from I believe about 60 different countries. So so you'll be meeting a lot of people from around the world. And there's further opportunities for professional development. Like there's some conferences that we've sent fellow delegations to. For example, there's the Nexus Global Summit in New York. We sent a bunch of fellows to just recently the Points of Light conference in Atlanta, which Renata and some other fellows went to. So we do occasionally help sponsor fellows to go to certain big conferences. We send out a list of events that are going on that fellows can attend, whether it's, you know, fun social events or sometimes also professional events, like, oh, there's this panel discussion on HIV and AIDS, thought fellows might be interested in, and we'll post it on our various communication channels and try and spread the word. So, so we're always trying to encourage fellows to find other places, you know, other professional development opportunities in each of the cities. And like most of our fellows are here in Washington, D.C., but we also have fellows in other parts of the country, like New York, San Francisco, etc. And in really just about any of the cities, there are events to be attending, you know, a lot of opportunities and places to network with other nonprofit professionals. So, so those are some of the experiences you may be having outside of your host organization. I don't know if you could add on what experiences you've had.
I mean, one of the greatest things of the fellowship is that, at least for me and from what I heard from all of the fellows, is that the experience just doesn't stay in your host organization, and actually is the contact with other fellows and all the opportunities you're offered to have, and all the information you're exposed to is great, or even sometimes better for some other fellows. Depends on your personality and other stuff, but it's great as the work that you will be doing in your host organization. So, for example, as Meredith mentioned, is we're fellows from around, during the Atlas Core history, it's been around fellows from 60 different countries. So, you know, you get to hear about what's the social sector in India, China, Japan, Latin America, so and so forth. So it's a lot about how you're interesting to, you know, knowing the culture, because everyone is very open and glad to always talk about the culture, and from small things to nonprofit things, daily life things. So, and in the side of Atlas Core, one of the great things is that it offers lots of opportunities, but it will be up to you. Like, they will never force you to take them. It's like they always be posting if there's a conference available. So, for example, we just attended the Points of Light. There's a starting block, and it's coming also. Nexus is coming in New York. So you always offer, they will support you a lot to attend to all these events. And there's also, since there's a very big network of fellows working in a wide range of topics. For example, they just mentioned some ideas, right? Now we have people in UN Foundation or young professionals for foreign policy. So all of them, they have events. Always, these organizations are always hosting events for the public. So you'll always get invitations to attend to hear what has been done in the social sector in other areas. And that's one of the most rewarding things if you're interested to broaden your knowledge of what's happening in other areas, or even if your own. For example, in the case of the Red Cross, you get to invited to lots of events that are happening internally, and yeah, that's basically it.
Awesome. Cool. All right. What's our next question?
So I'm already a fellow, and I'm accepted, but I want to know where will I live?
So so housing is ultimately the responsibility of the fellow. We do have in Washington, D.C., where the majority of our fellows serve, we do have some group houses. I think it's like 6 or 7 group houses or apartments now, and they're managed by an external management company. But placement in those houses is not guaranteed. It's placed on a first come, first served basis. So so some fellows choose to live in those houses or apartments. Some choose to find their own housing. A number of fellows either choose to live on their own, or if there isn't enough space in the housing, they live on, or they find their own housing. So in other cities, and for those fellows who are looking for their own housing, either the host organization might make some suggestions, but in general, those fellows will have to do some searching on their own. And we give some suggestions on resources, how to look for housing. There's some websites that are very popular in the U.S. for finding shared apartments or finding a room in a group house. We can give you some suggestions of how to search and how to email people. In general, I'd say almost all of our fellows do have to share an apartment or a house. Everyone generally gets their own bedroom, but it may, the stipend and the housing allowance essentially may not be enough for you to have your own bathroom. You may be sharing a bathroom and sharing an apartment, so like sharing a kitchen with some other fellows or other professionals. So we say that the budget is enough for shared housing, and we'll give you some tips on how to find that housing, or you could be placed in some of our group housing, but in general, you will probably have to do some searching on your own.
Great. I guess that's just about it when it comes about living. Yeah. It's about if you want to stay in Atlas Corps or you want to look housing on your own. Just having into mind that renting, it's very expensive in DC. It will depend where you're placed, but in most of the cities, there is a high cost of rent. Yeah. So. Housing is expensive in most of the cities where our fellows serve in any of the big cities in the U.S. So the housing here, that the amount you're paying for housing here, that might not even get you as much as you may be paying for housing in your country. So sometimes, the housing standards may be different. So so just prepare that it's going to be a basic living stipend, and if you want to go beyond those basic living stipends, some fellows do draw on their own savings. It's enough for anyone to live in our group housing or a shared living situation. But if you want your own apartment, you're going to have to rely on some of your savings. Definitely, and it also the closer you want to be from your host organization or from downtown, it's as in every city in the world, the more expensive it's going to be. So it depends what you want. If you want to live closer, but probably in a more residential area. Okay, so next question that we've been talking a lot about it. So how is the budget like? Yeah. So great. So that relates just to what we were just about talking about is the budget. For example, in DC,
The stipend is around $1,379. That's our current stipend in DC, and then it's adjusted on cost of living. So, for example, San Francisco is a more expensive city, so fellows there get a little bit of a higher stipend. Fellows who are serving in Minnesota, the cost of living there is a little bit cheaper, so they get a little bit of a lower stipend. So that's what it's based on, and the stipend is enough to cover food, shared housing, like we were just talking about, and local transportation. It's not enough for going out a lot, living in an expensive apartment. If you plan to do some travel and tourism, take a visit to go, visit your cousin on the other side of the country, or even if some kind of emergency comes up, it's not really meant to cover all of those things. It is manageable if you budget, but it's supposed to cover your basic needs. So I don't know if you had thoughts about how much it.
I mean, it's an opportunity for growth. It's personally that depends what are you used to have.
Yeah.
Personally, as they mentioned, it's just to cover basic needs. That means housing, transportation. Like the stipend will definitely cover your housing, your transportation, and your food. It's not for going shopping but you won't. I mean,
yeah.
Even the word is not survive, but you will have a good living with that. And even like once in a while, you might even buy a drink.
Yeah.
But it's not definitely for partying and having living the life. But it's more than affordable. So it depends what you want to do.
Okay. Yeah.
There's even fellows that save.
Yeah.
So.
Those who manage their money well can save a little bit.
It depends a lot on what are your needs and what are you spending your money on, but it's definitely doable. Okay, so jumping to another topic, can I bring my family?
So Atlas Corps discourages people from bringing their family on the fellowship. The stipends, the health insurance are only intended for one person. We're only providing a stipend and health insurance for one person, and we don't sponsor visas for family members. So it's likely that you'd be apart from your family for the year. That being said, we have had a few, not many, a few fellows who have brought family members here to the U.S. before, and either because they were on some other kind of visa. They were either coming on a tourist visa or they had their own, they were doing a temporary work here as well, or they were doing, in graduate school or something like that. So we have had fellows who have brought family here before, but they always did it, they always arranged their own visa. We had nothing to do with their visa, and they always paid for their own expenses. So the stipends, we're not providing double stipend if you bring your spouse with you, for example. So I generally wouldn't encourage it, although obviously your family's welcome to visit. But if your family's going to be here for a long period of time, it can present some additional challenges. Not impossible barriers to overcome, but it could present some additional challenges.
Great. So now jumping to another topic. At the beginning, you mentioned that there's an immersion training and a global leadership lab. So what shall I expect out of this training program that Atlas Corps will provide me as a fellow?
Yeah. So the way the training program works is every fellow starts with a 4-day orientation to the fellowship, where we sort of go over some basic things about American culture as well as American professional culture and just general introduction to the fellowship. Then there's 3 4-day immersions is what we call them. So 12 total days of training throughout the fellowship, where it's all-day trainings of all the fellows. We invite experts from the nonprofit or social sector to come and speak to our fellows and train them on different nonprofit management topics. So fundraising, social media, etc. And so those are, so there's 12 training days, and we also have monthly webinars, and these are webinars presented by our fellows themselves, where they're adding a little bit of additional information on either a subject area or a particular skill that they're an expert in. So most recently we had 2 of our fellows who serve at the Human Rights Campaign come and talk to us about LGBT issues around the world. So that's an example of a webinar that we would have every month. And then there may be some additional parts of the training program, such as readings that we assign, or they're part of the pre-reading for an immersion, or there may be some discussion topics. It's not the same as a full-time class. So we have these trainings like every 4 months, really, in the monthly webinars, but it's not the same as graduate school. You're not a student. You're not like taking classes every day. So that's kind of what our training program is like.
Great. So how does the post-fellowship life will look like once you finish your fellowship?
All right. So one question that people have related to this question of, one of our eligibility requirements is that everyone is committed to returning home to their home country at the end of the fellowship. It doesn't necessarily have to be your home country itself. Home region is also fine. So if someone from Nigeria after the fellowship goes back to Ethiopia, for example, totally within what we're looking for in the fellowship. We're looking for people to return overseas and continue working in the nonprofit sector. So that's to clear up one common question. And then also people ask about can I come back for graduate school, for example? So that's usually fine. We're looking for people to go home for at least a year, ideally 2 years or even more. But we do have fellows who have come back within that 1 or 2 years and come back for graduate school, and that's generally okay as long as there's still a plan to return home after graduate school. We would just have you, essentially we have those fellows write a letter to our board to ask for a waiver of our home residency requirement. That's generally how it works. But as long as there's a feasible plan to go back home at the end, that's fine. There is some fellows do get a requirement on their visa that they have to return home for 2 years before applying for a work or immigration-related visa. So if you're coming back to work in the U.S., this fellowship may not be for you if you're trying to come back to work in the U.S. within 1 or 2 years. So we're looking for people to spend longer time overseas. We do also try and engage our alumni. For example, we do try and make some of our trainings available via distance learning. We also have a premium membership of the website DevX, which is if you guys aren't familiar with it, it's basically an online network of development professionals from around the world, like every country. And so we have a premium membership there that some of our fellows have gotten access to. We also try and spread the word about conferences and things like that. And even sometimes we have a very active community, fellow community on our Facebook group, and we're trying to build up our LinkedIn group as well, where fellows can spread the word about professional opportunities or trainings that they've come across, or even like sometimes it's a question or a problem or issue that they're trying to solve in their work afterwards, like hey, has anyone dealt with this computer program before? I'm struggling with it. Sometimes people pose questions and get answers back. So that people really depend on that network and try and keep in touch. So, or like, I'm going to this conference in Switzerland in July. Is anyone else going? And so people like post stuff like that and try and stay in touch with the other fellows. So that's a little bit about our post-fellowship experience.
So now we're done with the questions, but I would just like to add some of my personal advices. The first one would be considerate. And as you're going through the process of applying, of already being selected, and of coming home and going through all this process, now you've already been selected, and you're going to have emails back and forth about the housing, about your host organization, about coming here, airplane tickets, and so forth. So be considerate that through all this process, whether you are already selected or you are applying, there's lots of people applying for the same program.
Mm-hmm.
There's hundreds of fellows applying for the same program. So personally, I was like, oh, why are they not answering me? And they're very responsive. People here, they're doing a magnificent job. They're very responsive. But also have in mind that there's probably hundreds of people in the same situation as you, and they're making their best efforts to respond everyone, and to answer all the questions, and but like be patient, because they will eventually reply. But okay, so second advice would be read the blog of there's as you go in the Atlas Core webpage. So I wanted to know like there's what we're covering right now in the webinar, it's the most frequent asked questions, but when it comes, you want to know more about how's the life of a fellow, what are people engaging in, what are the topics that people are talking about. The blog is a great resource of information. Basically, really right there, whatever comes into our life, how are we dealing with our lives here, how is our experience. So the blog is a great resource for knowing further what is covered in the webpage and in the webinars. And the third piece of advice would be
the blog. If you go to our webpage, it's a tab right at the top of the page, like a top right-ish. There's a gray tab that says blog, and just click on that. You can read our fellows' blogs entries.
Exactly. And the third question would be, if you have a question, but you know it's not a question you can ask to the Atlas Core staff, because it might be, for example, like what is the best phone network company I can get? What is the area you recommend me to live in DC? Like, what is like the best budget? How can you manage like your experience with the budget? I don't know. Every question that it's a good question, but you cannot ask, because there's this process around this. There's this process around. So I really encourage you to look the fellows through Facebook, or ask people in the staff if they can provide you some contact. And the fellows itself are always very responsive. They're always glad to hear from possible fellows or future fellows, and they will definitely help you and give you their experience and whatever question you have. So that would be my 3 pieces of advice.
Awesome. Thanks for that advice. So that covers our frequently asked questions. Now, for the last 8 minutes or so of this webinar, I'm going to try and take some of the questions that you guys have written in on our video. So if you have a question, just type it in as a comment on our YouTube video. If we don't get to your question, or if you have further questions, please email apply@atlascore.org. Like Renata mentioned, we do get a lot of emails. We get around 2,500 applications a year, so you can imagine how many emails we get with questions. We do answer those questions, but just write into apply@atlascore.org with the subject line "question from a webinar participant," and we'll try and get back to you as soon as we can. So the first question we have from Juma in South Sudan says, I graduated with a degree in philosophy and since then worked in nonprofit organizations in project management. This program sounds great. What opportunities are there for me to explore through participating in the Atlas Fellowship Program? So I would suggest filling out our online application and getting started in the process so that we could consider your application. That's really going to be the first step for you, is filling out the online application. If you go to our website and there's like a button on the right that says, I think, apply to be a fellow. Click on that, and you'll get started on the process. And I encourage you to apply. Vinay says, I have a question that is, in the requirement section, every person should have at least 2 years of experience in NGO nonprofit. Is full-time experience or part-time experience? I'm 21. I'm working for a nonprofit since 2 years. Can I apply for Atlas Core? So 21 would be on kind of the lower end of our age range of fellows. In general, we're looking for at least 2 years of full-time experience. It sounds like you're close. You've been working in nonprofits for 2 years. Some of it's been part-time experience. So I wouldn't necessarily so it sounds like you're a little bit borderline. I'd encourage you to apply like in a year or so, or after you have a little bit more experience. where you have what adds up to 2 full-time years of experience. Even if part of that is like interns or internships or full-time volunteering, that could count. But generally, to be successful in this fellowship, you need to have at least 2 years of full-time experience. So it sounds like you're very, very close, but I might wait a little bit longer until you can have a stronger application. So Aida says, I have 4 years experience in nonprofit, but I haven't finished my studies yet, though I am doing my last year. I'm very interested. However, I'm afraid I'm not eligible. Is there any opportunities for me to do fellowship in the nonprofit without getting paid? If I pay for everything by myself, can I find an organization that can invite me? Well, through Atlas Corps, you know, our structure is pretty much set up so that people, you know, who have finished at least their bachelor's degree and have some experience, you know, they apply through our fellowship, and they do get a stipend. So it doesn't sound like the Atlas Corps Fellowship is right for you right now. You may be interested in applying for some internship opportunities, but you know, as far as the Atlas Corps Fellowship goes itself, I'd recommend finishing your bachelor's degree and then applying. But you know, volunteer work or some international exchange programs like you know, there's the IVLP 3-week international exchange program, or there might be some internships that you could do. I'm less familiar with some of those other programs that are just purely volunteer work. I'd encourage you to check them out. But even, you know, doing an internship in your own country is experience that could count towards and help prepare you for the Atlas Corps Fellowship. Domingos says, I live in Angola and speak little English. I applied to the program and I'm the CEO of an NGO. So if you're the CEO of an NGO, you're welcome to apply. It sounds like you would have a lot of experience. However, you do need to speak proficient English. So and it's not necessarily that there aren't amazing nonprofit leaders out there who don't speak proficient English. And, you know, obviously there's plenty of talented people out there who don't speak English that well. We totally understand that, but in order to do a fellowship here in the U.S., you know, English is the language that people speak in offices here, and in order to be successful in your fellowship and have it be really worth your time, it's only going to be worth it if you speak English and can communicate with your office mates. So if you're taking English language instruction, I encourage you to learn a little bit more English and then maybe apply, or encourage your friends to apply. Someone asked about the process of the recommendation letter. When you ask for my recommenders via email, do you show them all my application that filled out to them? I should decide to tell my recommenders about all my story written in the application form. So your recommenders don't see your application. All they see is that they'll get an email that says, like, here's what Atlas Corps is, someone requested a recommendation for you, can you fill out these 5 questions or answer these 5 questions, and then upload it to our recommendation system or email it to us, and then we'll take care of the rest. It doesn't show them your application, so I'd encourage you to let your recommenders know to expect a recommendation email from us.
Yes, and as I mentioned before, like, let them know in advance. They will, once you do your application, at the end, once you finished it, there will be a link that says, like, say you will place an email, and then you will place the email of the person you're asking to do your application. So it's very highly recommendable that you talk to that person you're asking for your letter. You talk about the program and your experience, so they can write. Yeah. There's no draft. Absolutely. There's no layout for the. Yeah. It can be 3 paragraphs. To 3 letters. I mean, it depends on how the person writes that letter. Right.
Yeah. There's generally 5 questions that we want them to answer. Sort of, you know, how do you know this person? You know, what's your experience with them? And they can either answer those questions in a letter format, or they can answer like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Either way is fine. So someone says I have to provide my passport data, but I don't have a passport now. That's fine. I'd still encourage you to apply and put something in the passport field and say, you know, I'm applying for a passport right now. you consider that if you were accepted for the fellowship, you would have usually around 2 months, sometimes even as little as 6 weeks notice before the beginning of the fellowship. And so if you're really interested in the fellowship, I encourage you to start applying for a passport now. But you don't necessarily have to have a passport at the time you apply for the fellowship. Just put in that you're applying for a passport. But if you were accepted to the fellowship, you'd have to have a passport pretty quickly. So you might as well start that process now. Someone else asks, I'm a PhD candidate in sociology. I've done my research using the data collected in Nepal, but I have no experience in NGOs. Can I apply for the Asan Nanum Atlas Corps Frontier Fellowship? So just to be clear, the Asan Nanum Atlas Corps Frontier Fellowship is just for fellows from South Korea. It's just a special initiative of our regular fellowship for fellows from South Korea. Even if you've done your research in other countries or you have experience in other countries, that's totally fine. It basically means you just have to be, I think, from South Korea. And those fellows ought to do an interview with, in addition to an interview with Atlas Corps and their host organization, they also do an interview with the Asan Nanum Foundation. They have to be kind of approved by all three organizations in order to be accepted. But really, anyone can apply. If you have research that can be applied to the social sector, I'd encourage you to apply. It's hard for me to know without looking closer at your profile, but so if you're doing stuff that could be useful in a nonprofit, then sure. So say you're like doing research on poverty alleviation or something like that. That could be applied in the social sector. It's hard for me to know without looking more closer at your profile what no experience in NGOs means. Everyone has to have some kind of at least 2 years of professional experience that can be applied in an organization here in the U.S. So go ahead and start the application. It sounds like you could be a fit for our program. If you have more specific questions about your specific experience, I'd encourage you to email apply@ascor.org. And then finally, I think the last question that we're going to get to today is someone from Sudan who says he's the founder and coordinator of Sudan 2.0, a nonprofit center dedicated to educate and train Sudanese civil society with crowd-based technology like crowdsourcing, crowdfunding, and crisis mapping. How can I know if the fellowship can help me to keep my work up? Should I go through the list of NGOs and try to contact them? First of all, no, don't go through the list of NGOs and try to contact them. Really, any communication with host organizations should go through Atlas Corps. So it's actually counterproductive for you to try and contact our potential host organizations, and people who do that could actually end up being disqualified. It messes up our line of communication. So just apply for the fellowship, and then we'll take care of contacting NGOs. In terms of how can you know if the fellowship can help you to keep your work up, it sounds like if you are educating and training Sudanese civil society, that sounds perfect for our fellowship. So I would say that would be a good training for what you're doing back home in Sudan, and I'd really encourage you to apply. In terms of working here in the U.S., training here in the U.S. while simultaneously working on your organization back home, that can be a little bit difficult. So if you run your organization, it will be very difficult, like depending on what stage it's at. If it's maybe still in the startup phase, you could still be kind of doing a little bit of that on the side, but it would be very difficult to be running an organization back in Sudan while you're here in the U.S. So a number of our fellows do occasionally do some side projects where they're not necessarily not work in the U.S., but side projects for organizations back home, or they're still like maybe consulting for an organization overseas. But it can't interfere with, you're at a full-time fellowship. You're going to be at your organization at least 40 hours a week. So don't expect to be spending a lot of time on, your old organization or the organization you expect to be working for back home. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question, but in general, I think I encourage you to apply and at least consider it. So we are at 12:04, and I realize there may have been some new questions that have come in since I've been talking. I will try and answer them as best as I can via chat or via the comment system or via apply@askcore.org. If we didn't get to your question, feel free to email us. Again, apply@askcore.org and just put question from a webinar participant. We'll try and get to it. As of right now, I do want to be respectful of people's times, and we've actually already gone a little bit over. So I'm going to end the video now, but thank you for watching, and thank you for all your wonderful questions. And I hope to see all of your fantastic applications. So thanks so much, guys.